Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Hope everyone is doing okay today. It's Friday, so that's always great. My weeks are weird now because they don't necessarily end on Friday. They kind of just keep ticking along for the entire week. There's no end to it. But nevertheless, I understand that for everybody else it's Friday, so we're leading into a weekend. So check my volume. My bad. I always check my sound before I continue. Hope everyone is doing okay today. What I want to talk about today has to do with Ocasio-Cortez on CNN and this idea for abolishing ICE and the way that the media is accepting this. I find a few dynamics here that are pretty interesting. And in fact, let me send this to Twitter to make sure people have it. But Ocasio. But long story short, Ocasio-Cortez, of course, gets elected. People are shocked that she got elected because no one knew that she even existed, with the exception of people like me and lefty media screaming that this woman is awesome, with us whispering a dream that she may actually take office. That dream actually came to fruition, in which case Ocasio-Cortez beat Joe Crowley. I call him Invisible Man because he ducked out on a debate. And will most likely go to Congress. A lefty's lefty. A Democratic Socialist. That's pretty amazing. We have two of them now in Congress. Sanders, independent senator from Vermont, and Ocasio-Cortez, who's devout in those particular ideals. One of the things that these people are trying to catch up with, because you have MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, all these networks are like, oh my God, this woman beat Joe Crowley, kind of like Brat beating Eric Cantor. Who is this person? One of the things they've jumped on was her abolish ICE. To them, it's stark. It's over the top in what she's calling for. She's saying abolish ICE. Now, this is stark only if your memory goes back to 2003, because ICE didn't exist until George Bush enacted them in this kind of National Defense Authorization Act, with a bunch of hosts of things that were extra constitutional, but nevertheless were passed in the wake of 9/11. CNN host is questioning Ocasio-Cortez on this thing of ICE, because this was on her platform, abolish ICE. She hasn't hedged on it. She has been outspoken about it. And now that she's won, what does it mean? Ultimately, all of these news networks are trying to go around her campaign, and they're looking at her platform, and it's like, wow, this woman wants to abolish ICE. And they're asking her about it, and they're talking to her about it. And as they talk to her about it, and as she opens her mouth and say these things in this unhedged way, we need to get rid of this organization. Trump has used it as a Gestapo force to essentially put people in black sites. They have to deal with that conversation. Listen to how the CNN host is trying to deal with this particular conversation. She didn't know people like Ocasio-Cortez existed, and now she has to deal with talking to someone who's a full-throated Democratic Socialist, and is very clear on where she stands from the standpoint of ICE. I love this.
Ayanna Pressley out in Massachusetts doing that work. But here in New York and here in this district, I feel like it wasn't being done.
So you have called for a number of things, one of them being to abolish ICE. And you recently traveled to the border to Tornillo, Texas, to see the shelters, to see where some of these separated families are being held. What would you replace ICE with? And do we not need protection at the border?
Now, see, I find this question is so odd to me because it's somewhat leading. Do we not need protection at the border and abolish ICE? Those things are not the same. Those things are disconnected from one another. This is what always weirds me out about the way we talk about politics. For example, they would say a chemical strike has taken place in Syria, so we need to act. Well, wait a minute. Because a bad thing has taken place, you automatically need to punch somebody in the nose? And is it our responsibility to punch somebody in the nose? None of these questions are asked. It's almost automatic. One thing pertains to something else. They're disconnected. This idea of ICE is disconnected from protection at the border, and yet she connected these two things. That's a weird connection to make. Yes, You need protection at the border. No, you don't need ICE. There are differences in those things. It's just an odd arrangement for her to make in order to ask this question. That's all. Let's take a listen to Ocasio-Cortez's answer, because I love her in this. I love her being the mouthpiece for this because she's so good at it. Like, look at the debates between her and Crowley. She ate Crowley alive. She ate him alive. He didn't know what to do. This woman is hitting him repeatedly over and over and over again. And the ref wouldn't stop it. And he just kept getting hit in the face. And he's laying on the ground bleeding, and she continues to hit him over and over again. It is a potent argument to make when you have a message that you're trying to take and say, this is my vision of the world and this is what I want to take place. And your opponent only screams about experience. There's nothing else there to give way. She's awesome in these interviews. I've seen a few of these interviews, and the host almost is like a deer in the headlights, not necessarily knowing how to respond to this kind of grassroots scream of, we don't like what you guys have been doing. It needs to change. Well, Ocasio-Cortez is somewhat of, you could say, the figurehead to this, because she's one of the main things with this kind of big, splashy, oh my God, this woman took down Crowley. But she's a good mouthpiece for it. So let's hear her discuss this. Because the CNN host just put out this kind of erroneous combination that ICE is completely related to border security, and that those things are somehow, for some reason, in her mind, intrinsically linked. Let's hear Ocasio-Cortez dissect this particular point.
Well, we absolutely do need to make sure that our borders are secure, to make sure that people are safe in passage. But what we need to realize and remember is that ICE was established in 2003, right at the same time as the Patriot Act, the AUMF, the Iraq War. And we look back at a lot of that time and legislation as a mistake now. And I think that ICE is right there as a part of it. It has its extrajudicial nature is baked in to the structure of the agency, and that is why they're able to get away with black sites at our border, with the separation of children. We are committing human rights abuses on this border and separating children from their families, and that is part of the structure of the agency. We can replace it, and we can replace it with a humane agency that is directed towards safe passage instead of the direction of the criminalization.
What do you mean black sites? What do you mean about ICE black sites?
So I was just. Yes. So actually, we were just hopping off MSNBC, and they were talking about it. Basically, what we have is that people are not able to access, even our own members of Congress are not able to access what is happening in these sites. And that in and of itself, the secretive nature, and when we know that children are being kept and that human rights abuses are happening in without any sort of transparency or accountability, that is where we're at right now. That is simply what is happening.
I would note those facilities run by HHS, but I know some of the lawmakers who've even gotten inside have not been able to see some of the children.
So you agree they're black sites? Just as a flat fact. If you can't see into it, peer into it, it's a black site! Oh, God, man, CNN's so bad. She's like, what do you mean by black sites? Well, our own members of Congress have not been able to get to see certain agents. Oh, yeah, those are black sites. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Oh, I love this. She's so good at this. Yeah, I love this. Here's the other thing. Oh, and by the way, there's another part. So, right here, she was asked this question about ICE before, and people make this weird thing of, without ICE, there's no border security. And that's, of course, nonsense. I am not for open borders. I understand this idea of a reason for a nation state to be able to secure its borders. Fair enough. I think the immigration thing is played up by Trump. I think the fact that we're focusing on immigration in this way is purely a contrived argument because he doesn't want to focus on the other issues. And fact is, if you're happy with status quo, you don't want to focus on any other issue because for you, there isn't another issue. It's telling that this is the thing that Trump has gone to. Now, that being said, this is a stupid thing for Trump to go to. I'm just saying it is. From politics standpoint, this is a nonsensical place to go. You focus, it's besides the point. I'm just saying. You've stolen thousands of kids away from their mothers. And whatever you want to think of the American public, do you honestly believe that the American public is going to look at that and be perfectly okay with that? I'm telling you, they're not. They're not. Even people who hate the way we do immigration from the standpoint of the right are not going to necessarily be on board with seeing some kid screaming at the top of his lungs because his mother is not there. That's a hard argument to make. Now, to show that's a hard argument to make, Trump has backed away from that very specific policy and has now gone to the policy of just trying to have concentration camps with a bunch of immigrants going into it, depriving them of this kind of due diligence. They may be fleeing war zones. They may be fleeing for asylum. I think we should pay attention to those things. Donald Trump, not so much. Here's another point that Ocasio made. And yeah, that's always the question, like, what do you expect? Are you open borders fanatic? Like, all of these things, and people forget that ICE was established in 2003 and post 9/11. Frankly, authoritarian crackdown, where we saw the Patriot Act, the Iraq War, authorization of military force, and then, of course, you have the establishment of Homeland Security, which included the establishment of ICE. And that's when the first started seeing, again, the enforcement agency that does not answer to the Department of Justice. Before ICE, we had the INS. So we had the Immigration and Naturalization Services. They are very intense operations that we do need to monitor. We have the need to keep tabs on human trafficking, child sex trafficking, child pornography, and of course, just standard immigration in and out. And so the INS had handled that before. And so criminal investigations will get forwarded to the Department of Justice, which had the infrastructure to kind of handle those proceedings. And then there are other investigatory arms, either within the FBI or within Health and Human Services, that would handle those different pockets. Now, the Department of Homeland Security was established. It concentrated and centralized all those things into one. And those operations in and of themselves can continue. You know, you can have border and customs do things that they have always done. Essentially, there was something before ICE. The creation of ICE. We didn't have open borders before 2003. That's her point. That there was something there before ICE, and we jumped the shark under Bush to have this kind of takeover. I mean, her point is we don't need it. We had infrastructure there before to deal with these issues. We don't need it. We go back to what we had. We don't need to be ripping kids from their mothers. And no, yes, it didn't necessarily start under Trump. The infrastructure was in place, and even Obama used some of that infrastructure. But Trump has so far jumped the shark that has drawn a certain amount of attention to it. Last point, well, two last points. 2 points. In some cases, we've heard pedophiles having access to the kids, meaning some of the people that they have working at these centers as they separated children from their mothers. Some of these people ended up being pervs from the standpoint of kids. And now we have people like Kristen Gillibrand joining for calls to abolish ICE. Listen to her. It's tepid, but it's there nonetheless. Come back. Now, understand, Kristen Gillibrand is trying to run, she most likely will be running for the presidency. She is trying to beef up her lefty bona fides. And one of those things of trying to beef up her lefty bona fides, let's get rid of ICE. Ocasio-Cortez says it, fuck yeah, I'm on board. And so she's come out also with the thing of abolishing ICE. I'll go to her report later. Because they're forcing a commercial down my throat. Oh, here we are. All right.
I believe that it has become a deportation force. And I think you should separate the criminal justice from the immigration issues. And I think you should reimagine ICE under a new agency with a very different mission and take those two missions out. And so we believe that we should protect families that need our help. And that is not what ICE is doing today. And that's why I believe you should get rid of it, start over, reimagine it, and build something that actually works.
Political force. Fucking A, man. What I mean is, how do you get people to do what they don't want to do, or what they don't care one way or the other? This idea that they can either win or that they can lose. Meaning, if they want to win, then they have to take certain positions that would allow them to create a pathway to get to where they need to go. This woman knows that if she's going to run in the president, she has to run through the primaries. And she knows there are a lot of lefties who are angry and pissed off and cynical and want a particular path. She needs to beef up her bona fides enough where they would say, yeah, okay, fair enough. That's what she's trying to get. She's trying to get the fair enough vote. So in her mind, like Trump saying he's going to build a wall, he's going to do what he needs to do to build a wall. In her case, it's, I'm going to abolish ICE. All right, fair enough. It boils down to you have to believe it. But it's not just her. More than a dozen ICE agents called to dissolve the agency. Even some of the agents themselves are saying, look, we need to end this. This has gone too far. More than a dozen U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement special agents have signed a letter to Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen calling for an elimination of ICE and shift its work to another bureau. At least 19 ICE investigators signed a letter to Nielsen saying they were concerned that the Trump administration crackdown on immigration was preventing them from carrying out agency's other duties. Essentially, you've put all the resources into snatching people that we don't have resources to do actual investigative work. Investigators have been perceived as targeting undocumented aliens instead of transnational criminal organizations that facilitate cross-border crimes impacting our communities and national security, the letter states. Listen to what this is saying. You've spent all your time on this racist policy of just kicking people out of the country that actual criminal organizations to which we have spent, our job is to monitor, we haven't been able to do. You've been diffusing our resources into areas that have been draining us of actual quality work, dealing with essentially criminal organizations that exceed nations. That's a big fucking deal. I mean, the point of ICE was to go after these type of organizations. And Donald Trump has essentially turned it into a Gestapo force. When Hitler was, and I'm not comparing Trump to Hitler. I'm not. At least I know people always say they're not making the comparison, but I'm making a comparison to the analogy where ideology gets in the way of good policy, if that makes sense. Hitler had an opportunity to essentially take Britain out of the war. Britain, Dunkirk, I think the movie itself, I haven't seen the movie, but I would imagine the movie talks about this. All of these British troops have been routed, and they're sitting on the banks, open to attack. Hitler has the opportunity to attack them, but chooses not to do so. Now, the understanding is, at the time, was quoted something to the effect of, look, they're kind of like us. The Brits are like us. Meaning we come from the same stock and the same heritage. And we should be able to make some kind of deal with them. Now, Brits were never going to make a deal with Hitler in this case, but in his mind, based on his own ideological racist view of the world, this is not something I need to do. Now, this is insane. Your goal is to win a war. You're at a war. You destroy those troops on that island because those people are going to come back and go after you later. I'm kind of making this point here, too. Whether you want to say Donald Trump's reasoning is purely from a political standpoint of he's beefing up his base, or whether it's this idea of Mexicans being rapists and drug dealers, and I assume few of them are good people. I suspect it's more of the latter, which means that there's a certain ideological perspective that has nothing to do with the reality of events. These investigators are saying investigators have been perceived as targeting undocumented aliens instead of transnational criminal organizations. Meaning the person trying to get some level of health care, the person who's been here for a few years, who has integrated themselves into society itself. You're going after these people. People who, for all intents and purposes, have been here for a while. They're not violent. They're not criminals. You're just taking out regular people. There was one case where they said the woman was trying to get like cancer treatment or something, and the ICE agents grabbed the person. You're going after people who are not necessarily threats and people who are not necessarily criminals at the expense of actual criminals. That's what the letter's trying to get across. I'm saying that is an ideological choice that has nothing to do with the reality of events. That's the point I'm trying to make. Let's keep going. The agents who signed the letter are members of the Homeland Security Investigations. A section of ICE agents in the division work on crimes like drug trafficking, cyber crimes, human smuggling, according to the New York Times. The agents suggest that Nielsen create a second bureau just for their investigations and another for immigration, detention, and deportations. We can't do our job because all of the resources are into detaining and grabbing. He's turned it into a Gestapo force. And in doing that, he's been able to drain the resources out from actual investigations that need to take place. Agents themselves are saying this organization needs to be abolished. So, or dissolved, let's say it that way. A dissolution of the agency. I call it abolished, they're calling it dissolve. But at the end of the day, they're saying this needs to be broken up into two functions, not just one. So, good on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Awesome argument for it, and awesome pushback on the media who's trying to, hey, if you get rid of ICE, I mean, are you calling for open borders? Are you calling for open borders? No, we're not calling for open borders. Strong heart woman. Hitler studied the American Indian reservation system and used as design his concentration camps. Why not use the American system of genocide and stealing kids from their families like my own mother was stolen? Ouch, that's painful. That's painful to say, let alone to have to deal with. Look, my grandfather was Native American. With at least half. I gotta be honest, I don't know much about Cherokee traditions on this. We were raised for the most part as African American. We never considered ourselves split heritage, even though all of us knew that, you know, he was Native American. We can trace the lineage back, I think, to a few levels before him, but at that point it goes kind of off the rails. Even my grandmother, apparently Native American Cherokee also, in her family. My grandfather is more of a stunning example of this, just because you can look at him and tell what he is. Like, there's no, it's like, you know, the doesn't have curly hair, none of that stuff. His features are that of a Native American. Look, we've done bad things, and we never honestly deal with the history in this country. It's always funny to me that we were shake our finger at the Russian Revolution. Oh, those, you know, look at those people, those workers rising up under a czar. But yeah, they were under a czar. They were under a dictator for all intents and purposes, and we were okay with that dictator because he was part of the family. Nobody ever says anything about the fact that these guys are dictators. Royalty are dictatorships. They just don't call them that. What's taking place in Iran, or what's taking place in Saudi Arabia? Those are kingdoms, just like kingdoms of Europe, in this case, kingdom of Russia. Lenin was pushing back against essentially a totalitarian state. Stalin may have ended up back in a totalitarian state, fair enough, but that's not necessarily indicative of what communism is, or what socialism is. They took it in a particular direction. I guess my point in this is, the wars that were fought in order to, you know, the Bolshevik, the White and Red Army, that war that was fought, and you could say the atrocities that came after it and everything else. It's always weird to me that gets labeled as horrific, but the founding of this country always bleaches that other part out of destruction of the Native Americans. Committed an absolute genocide. When you go to the Revolutionary War, it gets fucking fascinating. Did you know that the Brits had a line in the sand saying we won't go beyond a certain point because they didn't necessarily want to go past, you know, this kind of Native American area? People who are in the States did not like that, however, and they believed that they should be able to just push forward. Part of the reason for that war was because they wanted a capitalistic expansion that Brits refused. The Revolutionary War gets fascinating. I'm saying we don't regard our history honestly. And unless that's baked into the cake, the original sin of murdering in a genocide coupled with the enslavement of a population in order to build the country that they just stole. It's amazing to me that that's always forgotten. It's always amazing to me. Sadism has been cultivated by propaganda. God, that should be on a t-shirt. That should be on a t-shirt. Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Mao killed millions of their own people, and they'll say, yes, Stalin killed millions of their own people. Yes, that's also true. Yeah, I don't look, those people who try to bleach away the things that took place in those countries, I don't do it at all. It is what it's fair. It's true. It is what it is. I'm making a point that so have we. I'm making a point that so have we. Not just genocide. The value of generation by slavery funded the American Industrial Revolution. Data. That's my point. That's my point. And no one is defending that dipshit Shane Schroeder. Okay, I don't know what that argument is about. Well, the monarchies were capitalistic, so they were okay. Yes, that is true. That's true. A lot of people don't realize this, but Western powers sent in militaries into the Soviet Union in order to put back the way things were. We don't like this Bolshevik worker revolution stuff. We need to put that back in place. We want the Tsar back in power. So, yeah. Look, I'm going to end this, but I just wanted to make the point. Ocasio-Cortez is kicking ass. And part of her winning this election has done two things. If you remember, the moment that she won this contest, the vote came in for the superdelegates where they were like, okay, we're going to lessen power. Now, I personally agree that this is a lessening of the power, but I don't necessarily see how this is substantial. Everybody else is trying to sell this as a substantial victory. After she won, questions started to come up of, whoa, there's a grassroots that don't like the way things are going. And these calls to abolish ICE started to get louder just by virtue of her election win. Meaning that because she won, the conversation of abolish ICE got aired on national networks, MSNBC, CNN, newspapers. Anybody that wanted to cover her had to cover her platform, and part of that platform was the abolishment of ICE. And the argument that this organization was created in the wake of 9/11. And Trump has used it to magnificent, terrifying effect as a Gestapo force. It needs to be abolished. She's done amazing. She's doing amazing. Yeah, they're forced to cover her. Exactly. They're forced to. It's like, if you've noticed, I find this so weird. I've been covering her for about a month. I've known about her for maybe 2 or 3 months. And the media, I guess, have ignored her. And now all at once, all of them are trying to contact her and get their hands around her. And it's like, where have you guys been? And what have you guys been talking about if you didn't know this woman was a political force in New York? So, yeah. All right, I'm going to end this here. Endo-C, socialism equals of the people, for the people, trust the people, only the people, never the greedy rich. To me, that sounds like common sense. Just saying. All right, I'm going to end this here. I will see you guys shortly, probably in 10 minutes. I have a video on TYT. I have a contact. An anonymous source has told me that they're having issues, and I kind of want to do a story on it. Anonymous sources are always weird to me. I don't necessarily like them in media. By the same token, I'll take it. I find it interesting, and the evidence, at the very least, what's taking place currently, lines up with it. So that story is coming up next. I'll see you guys shortly. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support the Patreon. Let me make sure I didn't miss anybody and didn't miss anyone. Thanks, guys. I'll see you shortly.